Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's weekly podcast on the big stories developing in the region. My name is Amran Zaman, and I've just come back from Ukraine. The former Soviet country has seized the world's attention amid fears that Russia's Vladimir Putin is about to launch an invasion, despite warnings from the US and its European allies about the severe sanctions his country will likely face. Amid all the hawkish rhetoric, Turkey is the one country that inspires more confidence among Ukrainians than most. Here with us today is Kusa, an international relations analyst with the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. And I'm going to ask him to explain why Ukrainians are so fond of Turkey and its autocratic leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Thank you so much for joining us at this very critical time in Ukraine. Welcome to our program. The main topic of our discussion, we have a Middle East perspective, obviously, will be Turkey and Ukraine. And as you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is arriving in Kiev on Thursday. And there's a lot of buzz about Turkey, isn't there, and its drones. Can you tell us a bit about why Turkey is, so much in the news these days?
Well, I guess it's because Turkey is being seen as one of these emerging regional players, countries which have resources, ambition, political ambition, and plan to, and willingness to position themselves as, some kind of new regional super state, that has an ambition to become more and more active and play a bigger role in intra-regional and regional developments. And I think this is how Turkey is being seen around the world, and this is certainly how Turkey is seen in Ukraine.
But why particularly in Ukraine? I mean, we know that Turkey is selling drones to Ukraine, has quite intense and growing military cooperation with Ukraine. So clearly within the current context with this threat of a Russian invasion, obviously it's beyond what you just described. Do these drones really make a difference?
Well, there are several reasons for this view of Turkey from Ukraine. One is, of course, the drone issue. They're not making any military difference in the military context right now. Well, because they haven't been used often, frequently in the conflict in eastern regions. But of course, they have a pretty huge political and psychological impact, on Ukrainian public opinion, because the public sees Turkey as the country who provides Ukraine with weaponry, which is advanced and pretty good enough to maintain the military balance between Ukraine and Russia and pro-Russian forces in the east. So, of course, this is the first reason. It's like Turkey is being seen as the country, a potential ally, military ally against Russia, or if not military ally, but at least a political one, who can help Ukrainian military sector and Ukrainian army to modernize. The second reason is, of course, Turkey's regional stance. I mean, Ukrainians are pretty active while surfing the net and news about Turkey. What is Turkey doing? How Turkish president positions himself on international arena? What does he say? And the Turkish media are pretty active in Ukraine. So I could say that at least in big cities, there is a high level of awareness about what Turkey does on the international arena, and many people like that. They like a country. They see Turkey as the country which is rising, and trying to play a more active role in international relations and defend their national interests. And actually, the mere fact that they have national interests, very, very concrete, specific, this is something that Ukraine lacks. And of course, many people in Ukraine, they see Turkey as the country which Ukraine should have been, a strong country which knows its national interest and knows how to defend it. And the third reason is, of course, that Turkey is, a country which everybody knows about. I mean, because of tourists, Ukrainians are one of the most fast-growing markets for Turkey, as tourist-wise. Like 15% of all tourists, for example, in Turkish Antalya are Ukrainians. And this is a huge number. And the Ukrainians were among the biggest groups of tourists coming to Turkey every year for several years now. So, of course, this is very easy for everyone to know, where is Turkey, what is Turkey. And also because of this, because I think President Erdogan's image himself is also something that influences the view of Turkey in Ukraine, because, well, let's say Ukrainian society is predominantly more conservative, in some ways, at least in a way they see how politics should be played. And of course, with the view here is that we don't have this kind of a strong man who can lead us to anywhere. That's why Erdogan is someone who is seen positively in Ukrainian society, as a leader, as a strong leader who can, again, defend his country, who can stand up for his country. And this is what, again, drives this positive dynamic in Turkish image in Ukraine. So I will place, so I think these three reasons, they are the major ones.
Well, several points. First of all, in terms of the drones, they're not using them, as you said, very much, though they did use them once lethally in October when when the Ukrainian soldier died out there in the Donbass. And so Ukrainian forces retaliated using the drone for the first time. But I think overall, they're refraining from using them because they don't want to be seen as provoking Russia, right? There's that. But beyond that, if Russia decided to actually invade Ukraine, most military analysts would agree that the drones will ultimately not have that much of an impact, correct? But in the context of this low intensity conflict being waged by the pro-Russian forces, yes, the drones can be useful. They help certainly gather a lot of intelligence. On the tourism point, we also hear a lot of Ukrainians say that, if indeed Russia attacks, with all those Russian tourists that also go to Turkey, how are we going to go there and share the same space? And on your final point about Erdogan being so popular, aren't Ukrainians aware also that Turkey has a terrible human rights record, and that back at home, Erdogan is viewed, at least by nearly half of the people as an autocrat?
Well, there is, again, yes, everyone is aware that Turkey is not a full democracy, is not a genuine democracy, and Erdogan is not a democratic leader. But for many Ukrainians, it's not the most important part when they see it. Especially now with the current political situation here, and this is a situation of a chronic political turbulence. And with social and economic problems we're having, now with energy problems that we have also because of the hike in gas prices in Europe, there is a great need. There is a great need in a new strong leader. So I even think not necessarily a very democratic one. If you would analyze what are the most popular leaders, foreign leaders for Ukrainians, last year, one of the most popular was Andrzej Duda, president of Poland. Again, oh, wow. I don't need to explain you what is the image of Poland in Western European view, of course. But here, we see Poles, and their party is as a successful one. Again, they have problems with democracy. They have problems with different, for example, the judicial reform, which is being criticized among the European Union. But again, they have this kind of attitude, which is very positively been perceived by Ukrainians. Before 2020 political crisis in Belarus, Lukashenko, president of Belarus, was for many years one of the most popular leaders in Ukraine. Again, because of this, because we are neighbors, because we speak the same language, because we understand. I mean, his approach when, for example, he was filming himself inspecting different factories, and throwing out directors of these factories for corruption on TV, and this was very. I mean, this kind of shows they are really they were positively perceived by Ukrainians, because this is something that in our country many people want, actually.
Well,
So,
but now Belarus is sort of seems to be on Russia's side and could be a potential staging ground for part of an invasion. But you touched upon energy, and during our conversation in Kiev, you described Turkstream, this pipeline running from Russia to Turkey that's supposed to eventually carry gas to Europe, as a stab in the back. How does that chime with Turkey's image as this country that's an ally of Ukraine, that's helping it balance Russian influence?
Well, no one actually considers this to be something very bad, because again, first of all, Turkstream is a very long story. So it began in the mid-2000s when the first plans to construct a pipeline were drawn up. And actually, well, of course, this story was negatively perceived only by some in the Ukrainian government. I mean, the general public, again, if you're speaking about the general public, the energy issues are too difficult for them to understand. I mean, for example, it's really difficult to explain to people that Turkstream and Nord Stream 2 are interconnected in a way. I mean, of course, these are separate projects, but they are connected because both projects are about supplying gas, circumventing, around Ukraine. So not like weakening our transit potential. But again, since we have war with Russia, not with Turkey, and that Russia is the main bad guy, of course, I mean, such stories as the Turkstream, they are not being perceived as very bad. So again, I'm not here to say that Turkey is being idealized in Ukraine at some point. Of course, there are some problems in bilateral relations. We have our own differences, especially in trade. For example, now with the free trade agreement.
So why don't you tell us a bit about that? Because that was something that you raised about local businessmen feeling threatened by this free trade agreement. Can you tell our audience why that is?
Yeah. Well, I will start with the three main points of cooperation between Turkey and Ukraine, so that everyone will understand what our bilateral relations look like actually. So besides all these media and media person stories, so the first one is the military cooperation, which I have already mentioned, and especially the manufacturing of aircraft engines. Ukrainian companies make these engines for Turkish drones, and now they are going to make them for heavy military helicopters, and also for another project of an unmanned aircraft, which is called MIUS. And the second field of cooperation is actually trade and infrastructure. Turkey is among top investors in Ukrainian economy, and Turkish construction companies are very active in the so-called huge construction or big construction program. It's a presidential program aimed at building and renovating roads mainly in Ukraine, and Turkish companies are very active here. And the third field of cooperation is the political solidarity between Ukraine and Turkey on the issue of Crimea, the occupation of Crimea, and human rights violations of the Crimean Peninsula, especially against Crimean Tatar community. Now, the problem of Turkish-Ukrainian bilateral relations is that they are limited in many spheres. So, for example, in the military field, as I said, they are limited, they're confined to only this particular programs like aircraft engines. So they are not being developed very steadily in other fields. The second, for example, and also in trade, they are limited by the amount of goods we can offer each other. For example, now the bilateral trade between Turkey and Ukraine is around $5 billion. They want to make it up to 10 billion. This is this is the target Turkish and Ukrainian sides selected, for further cooperation. And here we have a big problem. There is actually Turkish economy and Ukrainian economy are very different. And Turkish economy is more sophisticated, more complex than Ukrainian one. The Ukrainian is simpler and more primitive to some extent. Our main export categories, like more than 50% of Ukraine's exports are raw materials. And of course, the free trade agreement, which the two sides are going to sign, I think they announced it last year that they would sign it at the beginning of this year. So maybe by Erdogan, with Erdogan visiting Kyiv, they're going to sign it. I don't know. The free trade agreement, the problem with it is that many local producers, local manufacturers in Ukraine, they fear that Turkey will gain access to our market, to Ukrainian market. And of course, this will be a strike, a very heavy blow for them, because Turkey, with all their companies, with all their resources, with the support the Turkish state gives to their companies while promoting their products, and they will just lose their positions and lose their jobs. And of course, that's why, for example, there are a lot of concern here, especially among cement industry companies, agricultural companies, among our manufacturers in light industry, especially textile. They think that Turkey will overtake our market. Of course, we don't know that for sure, because again, everyone is waiting for the agreement to be signed and for their conditions to be announced, because no one knows what actually was being negotiated. And I will remind you that the negotiations of the free trade agreement between Turkey and Ukraine has been going on for 10 years. I think it's 11 years this year.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, very long time.
But shifting back to the Russian threat, how concerned do you think Russia is about this Ukrainian-Turkish love affair?
I think the only thing that concerns Russia about it is the military cooperation. But again, I don't think that right now our cooperation, this level of cooperation between Turkey and Ukraine bothers Russia that much. I mean, I don't think they see it as a critical threat for them, because nothing fundamental happened yet. The drones which Turkey provided to Ukraine, which Ukraine purchased actually, yes, they are a pretty, an irritant for Russia. And actually they are, when the drone was used a couple of months ago in near Donbass in eastern regions, Russia's reaction was pretty harsh. But again, since these drones do not fundamentally change the military balance of powers between Ukraine and Russia, of course, I don't think Moscow is really concerned about what is going on.
So Erdogan has proposed to mediate between the Kremlin and Ukraine. And we just recently heard that Vladimir Putin is going to travel to Turkey after the Beijing Olympics. It's a bit vague, but the Kremlin announced this. Do you think that there is a role for Turkey? Do you think the Kremlin would, for instance, welcome that? Or what about Zelensky? Can Turkey make a difference?
Well, for Zelensky, of course, Turkey's proposal is, it's pretty fine. It's good because Ukrainian authorities appeared to struck a dead end on our negotiations with Russia, and really anything new is better than nothing. And I think they are they will be happy to accept this proposal. Actually, there were statements from some of Ukrainian officials who accepted, who said that this will be a good idea to accept the mediation proposal by Erdogan. For Turkey, it is very important because I see that Turkey's government and Erdogan himself want to portray themselves as this kind of new regional power that has to have a vote in something, that they can influence different processes, like they did in Nagorno-Karabakh, like they are doing in Libya, in Syria, and now in Ukraine. But for Russia, I think, their first reaction, as I remember, was negative, and they actually refused to accept Turkey's offer. Now, latest statements I was analyzing from them, they were softer, and I think at some extent they could accept this proposal so as to meet with Zelensky, but only after Russia will close their negotiations with the Americans, because this is what is important for them. You need to understand that Russia, since 2020, when the last meaningful talks on negotiations between Ukraine and Russia failed, they stopped seeing Ukrainian government and Zelensky personally as serious negotiators. And they actually, today, Russia doesn't talk to Zelensky. Putin isn't talking about to Zelensky, to Ukrainian audience, or to Ukrainian government. He's talking to the Americans. And this is the most important part for him. And so I think Turkey's proposal is just one of alternative paths for Putin to meet with Zelensky, but only in case when he will have some promises from the Americans and from the West about how we deal with Ukraine, and that's all. Now, can Turkey make a difference on our issue? No, I think no, because the problem with Ukrainian-Russian relations and these negotiations around conflict between Ukraine and Russia in the East is not about where the negotiations are held. So, I mean, you can organize them in Minsk, in Budapest, in Istanbul. It doesn't matter because, again, the problem is not who is the mediator or where do the leaders meet. The problem is that we have absolutely different views. I mean, Ukraine and Russia have absolutely different views on how to solve the conflict, on the nature of the conflict, and on ways to implement the so-called Minsk agreements, the peace settlement that was signed in 2015. So this is the main problem. And I don't see any initiatives from Turkish side on how to change it, on how to practically implement the agreements so that to resolve this issue. So the only thing I see is that Erdogan is willing to just organize a meeting, but the meeting itself is not interesting for Russia, first of all, and secondly, I don't think it will settle all the differences that exist between Russia and Ukraine in perception, of our conflict.
Well, maybe it's also to make sure that, Putin has the opportunity to tell Turkey personally how he'd feel if, Turkey abandoned its neutrality and, for instance, joined in any sanctions, because as we all know, when Russia invaded Crimea or annexed it, Turkey did not join those sanctions. So perhaps, that's something that Putin expects him not to do again if he actually proceeds with an invasion. So my last question is one that you probably won't like at all, but I have to ask, what do you think Putin will do?
Well, yeah, not that I don't like it. It's just very, it's a hard question because everyone is asking this question right now in Ukraine, and beyond. But it's really, it's very difficult to forecast, to make a very good forecast actually on that. I think, well, in my opinion, I think there are three scenarios of what is going on with Ukraine in the nearest months. The first one is that nothing will change. So Russia and the United States will negotiate, will finalize their negotiations. Maybe they will reach some compromise, several compromises on issues not directly related to Ukraine. Maybe they will reach compromise on Ukraine's non-accession to NATO. We call this scenario hybrid peace. So it's like peace, but not peace at all, because we still have this shelling in the east, but still it is this semi-stable, fragile situation of where we have been for 8 years. The second scenario is another military escalation, which Russia is said to be, is expected to prepare. If Russia will make a decision to strike Ukraine, I think it will not be a total, full-blown war. I doubt that this is what they want. I think they will head for a small, fast military operation just to show the West that they are eager and willing to use force so not only to talk, but also to use force when they want. In this case, again, everything is very difficult to forecast because, after that, the militaries will decide what will be next. And the third scenario is is a compromise between, Ukraine, the West, Russia, about the situation and about the Minsk agreements. This is what many people and many of my colleagues also are talking about, that that both Western countries and Russia, they could compromise on the way of how to implement the Minsk agreements, which Ukraine, is reluctant to implement that in the way they are written now, because they are written in a way which is not very beneficial to Ukraine strategically. But still, there is a possibility they will compromise on that, and then they will just tell Ukraine that, okay, so we decided you should implement these agreements in this way, so please do that. And again, this is a very difficult option, a very difficult scenario, because there are many subjective factors that could play here. From protests of part of the society which do not want Ukrainian government to implement these agreements, to political and economic consequences of after implementing them. So I think these three are basic scenarios of how can this end. And I'm not sure that Turkey will have a crucial role in each of these. I mean, I still think that Turkey will remain somewhat neutral to this situation, because I see, again, Erdogan's proposal is another indicator that he doesn't want this to escalate. So I think, to project these scenarios on Turkey's interests, I think they will be interested either in the scenario 1 or 3. So everything not involving military escalation will be okay for Ankara.
Well, Ilya, that was a fascinating conversation, and we thank you so very much for joining us. And we desperately hope that peace will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al-Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
So that brings us to the end of this week's On the Middle East. I hope you enjoyed the show, and let's all pray that peace prevails. Thank you, and see you soon.